An A-list actor, adored by millions, living a life most could only dream of. But behind the fame and fortune, a chilling secret was lurking. One so dark it sent shockwaves through law enforcement. When the police knocked on his door, they didn't find just a scandal. They uncovered something far worse, a secret that would shatter his perfect image and leave the world in disbelief. The drama around Robert Blake. Hollywood has always been a place where reality and fiction blur. It's a city built on storytelling. Stars live their lives in the spotlight. But the stories behind the scenes are darker than any screenwriter's dreams. Such was the case with Robert Blake, a once beloved actor. He was forever tarnished by the shocking, intentional ending of his wife, Bonnie Lee Bakley. Their story was as tragic and twisted as any film. So how did we get here? Robert Blake's career began in the golden glow of Hollywood's heyday. As a child actor, he was in the Our Gang comedies. His boyish grin and talent charmed audiences. He transitioned seamlessly into adulthood, earning acclaim for his intense performance as Perry Smith in Cold Blood, 1967, the film adaptation of Truman Capote's chilling true crime book. Later, his role as the street-smart detective Tony Beretta in the 1970s TV series Beretta made him a household name. But fame, as we know, doesn't guarantee happiness. Blake's off-screen life was turbulent. It was marked by failed relationships, personal struggles, and a reputation for being hard to work with. By the time he met Bonnie Lee Bakley, his career had slowed to a crawl, and his personal life was far from stable. On the other hand, Bonnie Lee Bakley was no stranger to scandal herself. Known for her opportunistic tendencies, Bakley had a history of relationships with older, wealthy men. Some saw her as a cunning gold digger, others as a woman desperate for love and security. When she met Blake in the late 1990s, she had already been married multiple times and had a string of legal troubles related to her schemes to con men out of money. Their relationship was tumultuous from the start. Reports suggest that Bakley was involved with other men while seeing Blake, including Marlon Brando's son, Christian. When she became pregnant, there was uncertainty over who the father was. A paternity test eventually confirmed that the child, a daughter named Rosie, was Blake's, prompting him to marry Bakley in 2000. But the marriage was far from a fairy tale. Blake reportedly despised Bakley and felt trapped in a relationship he never wanted. Friends and colleagues claimed he spoke openly about his disdain for her, describing their union as a nightmare. But none of these compared to the horror that would soon happen. On May 4, 2001, the couple went out for dinner at Vitello's, a small Italian restaurant in Studio City, California. It was a low-key outing. Blake was a regular there. But what happened next would make headlines for years. After their meal, the couple walked to their car, parked on a quiet street near the restaurant. According to Blake, he realized he had left his gun, an old revolver he carried for protection, back at the restaurant. He claimed he left Bakley in the car and returned to retrieve it. When he came back, he said he found Bakley slumped in the passenger seat, fatally shot. Panicked, Blake ran to a nearby house for help and called the police. It seemed like a random act of violence, a tragic but senseless murder. But as investigators dug deeper, the story took a darker turn. Blake's version of events didn't add up. For starters, the weapon he retrieved from the restaurant wasn't the murder weapon. Ballistics confirmed that Bakley was killed with a different gun, one that was never found. Investigators also uncovered Blake's mounting frustration with his wife. Witnesses said Blake wanted Bakley out of his life. He allegedly asked 2 stuntmen he had worked with to take care of her. Both men denied agreeing to such a plan, but their statements painted a damning picture. The evidence against Blake was circumstantial, but compelling. Police believed he had staged the scene to make it look like a random shooting. His convenient trip to get a gun he didn't need, while leaving Bakley alone in the car, raised suspicions. In 2002, Robert Blake was arrested and charged with murder, along with conspiracy to commit murder. The trial was a media circus, with every twist and turn dissected by the press. Blake maintained his innocence, claiming he would never harm the mother of his child. His defense team argued that the prosecution's case was built on unreliable witnesses and speculation. In 2005, after months of testimony, the jury acquitted Blake of murder and conspiracy. They cited insufficient evidence. It was a stunning verdict, but Blake's legal troubles weren't over. A civil trial later that year found him liable for Backley's wrongful death. He was ordered to pay her children $30 million. The civil case didn't require the same level of proof as the criminal trial, and the outcome left many convinced of his guilt. The demise of Bonnie Lee Backley remains one of Hollywood's most infamous scandals. For Robert Blake, the verdict didn't mean redemption. His reputation was shattered, his finances drained by legal fees and the civil judgment. He faded from the public eye, living a quiet and reclusive life until his death in 2023. In the end, the case left more questions than answers. Was Robert Blake a desperate man or an unlucky star? The truth may never be fully known, but the story remains a chilling reminder that sometimes the darkest Hollywood dramas happen off-screen. Paul Bern's secrets. The case of Paul Bern is one of the most haunting and mysterious stories from old Hollywood. Paul Bern was an actor and director in the early days of Hollywood's golden age, but he is perhaps best known for being the first husband of Jean Harlow, one of the most iconic actresses of the time. His untimely death, which was initially ruled a suicide, revealed a tangled web of secrets and hidden truths, many of which remained buried until after his death. The year was 1932 when Paul Bern's body was found in his Hollywood home. He was discovered by his housekeeper, lying dead from a gunshot wound to the head. At first, the police and many others believed it was a suicide. The tragic loss of the young director shocked the public, especially because of the high profile of his wife, Jean Harlow. But there was always something about the case that didn't quite add up. And over time, the truth began to emerge, layer by layer. Jean Harlow and Paul Bern had been married for just a short time, but their relationship was far from perfect. Jean, only 21 at the time, was one of Hollywood's biggest stars, known for her platinum blonde hair and sultry roles. Paul, a director and actor, was several years older, but not quite as famous. Despite their marriage, rumors swirled about their unhappy union. Many believed that their relationship was strained, and those who were close to the couple began to speak about tensions and unhappiness behind the scenes. The most shocking revelation came after Paul's death, when investigators began to look deeper into his personal life. They discovered that Paul had been hiding a significant and painful secret. He suffered from a severe genital deformity. This was a medical condition that caused him great embarrassment and emotional distress, especially in the context of his marriage to a young and beautiful movie star like Jean Harlow. Some speculated that this condition made it impossible for him to consummate his marriage with Jean, leading to growing frustration and strain between the couple. At the time, such personal issues were kept private, but after Paul's death, the truth slowly began to come to light. This secret condition, along with other stresses in his life, seemed to have been weighing heavily on him. However, there were even more revelations that came to light after his death. The investigation uncovered that Paul had been secretly undergoing treatment for his condition, something he had kept hidden from both Jean and the public. This was a major point of concern in the investigation, as some believed that Paul's deep sense of shame over his condition may have led him to take his own life. But as the police dug deeper, they also discovered troubling details about the relationship between Paul and Jean's mother, who had a significant influence over her daughter. Jean Harlow's mother, a dominating and controlling figure, disapproved of the marriage from the beginning. She reportedly thought Paul wasn't good enough for Jean and did not approve of his career or his background. Some believed that Jean's mother had a role in creating a toxic atmosphere around the couple, further adding strain to their marriage. One of the most intriguing aspects of the investigation was how Jean Harlow reacted to her husband's passing. Her reaction was puzzling to many. Some felt her grief was oddly subdued. Others thought she was trying to cope with the stress of the situation. However, the police never found any concrete evidence to suggest that Jean was involved in her husband's demise in any way. She was devastated by his passing. But her strange behavior and the troubled marriage led many to question if she knew more than she let on. The police had initially concluded that Paul's death was a suicide, but there was much speculation in the public and press that it might have been something else. Some suggested it could have been an accident, while others whispered that it might have been murder. Despite the rumors, no one was ever charged in connection with his death, and the case remained officially closed. Still, the question of what really happened to Paul Bern lingered for years. To this day, Paul Bern's death remains one of Hollywood's great unsolved mysteries. The investigation revealed a dark and tragic side to a seemingly perfect marriage. His death was the product of hidden pain and secrecy, and it raised questions that have never fully been answered. His death revealed truths. They showed a troubled man, suffering in silence. His marriage was not the fairy tale many assumed. The Gig Young Case. Gig Young was the kind of actor people loved to watch. He had charm, wit, and a way of making every role feel effortless. He even won an Oscar for his performance in They Shoot Horses, Don't They? In 1970. But behind the confident, charismatic man the world saw on screen, Gig Young was fighting battles no one fully understood. His life ended in tragedy on October 19, 1978, when he ended the life of his wife, Kim Schmidt, and then himself in their New York apartment. This shocking event was a far cry from the life of glamour and success everyone thought he had. But when the police dug into what happened, a much darker story began to unfold. One of personal struggles, a history of addiction, and a marriage that ended before it even had a chance to truly begin. But first, let's talk about his career and how, because of that, no one had a single clue as to what was really going on with him. Gig Young's career had all the makings of a Hollywood success story. He was the kind of actor who could move between drama and comedy with ease, winning over audiences and critics alike. But success didn't bring him happiness. Instead, it seemed to magnify his demons. Gig had been married 5 times, and every relationship was troubled in one way or another. His struggles with alcoholism were well known in the industry, and they often affected his personal life and career. By the time he met Kim Schmidt, a 31-year-old German actress, Gig was in his mid-60s. Friends said he seemed to want a fresh start. The couple married on September 27, 1978, and for a brief moment, it looked like things might turn around for him. But just 3 weeks later, their lives ended in a tragedy no one saw coming. The events of October 19, 1978 are chilling. Police were called to the couple's apartment in Manhattan and found both Gig and Kim lifeless from gunshot wounds. Gig had shot his wife and then turned the gun on himself. The incident shocked everyone. People couldn't understand how a man who seemed to have everything could do something so horrific. The investigation uncovered signs that Gig had been spiraling in the months leading up to the tragedy. His career had slowed down, his drinking had gotten worse, and he was deeply depressed. Though he had tried to project an image of happiness, especially after his wedding to Kim, those close to him said he was anything but. Gig's problems didn't appear overnight. He had been battling alcoholism for years, often turning to alcohol as a way to cope with the pressures of Hollywood and his own insecurities. It was an open secret in the industry, but like many stars of his time, Gig kept it as hidden as he could from the public. On top of his drinking, Gig also struggled with depression. He had been in and out of treatment, but never seemed to find lasting relief. His relationships suffered because of his issues, and he often found himself alone, despite being surrounded by people. Even his Oscar win, which should have been the high point of his career, didn't seem to bring him the fulfillment he desperately sought. Kim, on the other hand, was a young actress just starting out. She and Gig met through mutual friends, and their whirlwind romance led to marriage. Friends later said that Kim might not have fully understood the depth of Gig's struggles when they got together. She had reportedly been excited to start a life with him, not knowing how troubled he was beneath the surface. The marriage was brief, lasting only 3 weeks before the tragedy. It's unclear what might have led to the events of that night, but some have speculated that Gig's depression and alcohol use played a major role. He may have felt trapped, hopeless, or overwhelmed, and in a moment of despair, made a decision that ended both their lives. Gig Young's death left behind more questions than answers. Friends, fans, and colleagues struggled to reconcile the man they knew on screen with the one who committed such a terrible act. His death became a grim reminder that fame and success don't always equate to happiness. Sometimes the people who seem to have it all are the ones struggling the most. To this day, the story of Gig Young serves as a tragic example of how mental health struggles and addiction can go unnoticed or untreated until it's too late. It's a haunting tale of a man who gave so much to his craft but ultimately couldn't save himself from his own demons. David Carradines' case. David Carradine's death in 2009 was the kind of story that left everyone stunned. Known for his iconic roles in Kung Fu and Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill, Carradine was a martial arts legend and a symbol of discipline and strength on screen. That's why the details surrounding his death in a Bangkok hotel room shocked fans worldwide. At first, the news reported it as a possible suicide, but as more information came to light, the story took a darker and more complex turn. On June 3, 2009, David Carradine was found lifeless in his luxury hotel suite in Bangkok, Thailand, where he had been filming a new movie. He was discovered by a hotel maid, hanging in a closet with a cord tied around his neck and genitals. The initial assumption was that he had taken his own life, but investigators quickly found evidence suggesting something else entirely. The circumstances were unusual and didn't align with a straightforward suicide. Carradine's hands were tied, and there were no signs of a suicide note or any indications of emotional distress in the days leading up to his death. The case was strange even by Hollywood's scandalous standards. As investigators dug deeper, the truth began to surface. David Carradine's death was not a suicide, but a case of autoerotic asphyxiation. This practice involves deliberately restricting oxygen to the brain to heighten sexual pleasure, and while it's not widely discussed, it's more common than people realize. The revelation turned a tragedy into a tabloid sensation. For fans who had grown up admiring Carradine as a disciplined martial artist and philosophical hero, the details of his death were difficult to reconcile. His passing became a public spectacle, sparking debates about privacy, the media, and the darker sides of human behavior. David Carradine's death cast a shadow over his career and legacy. For decades, he had been admired for his work in television and film, particularly for his portrayal of Kwai Chang Caine in Kung Fu, a role that blended martial arts with spirituality. He later enjoyed a career resurgence with his unforgettable role as Bill in Kill Bill Vol. 1 and Kill Bill Vol. 2. But after his death, the focus shifted from his work to the sensational details of his private life. Family members, including his ex-wives and children, struggled to process the way his death was reported. Some of them questioned the investigation, suggesting that foul play might have been involved. Carradine's brother, Keith, even hired a private investigator, believing there was more to the story than what was initially revealed. However, no conclusive evidence of foul play was ever found. The media's handling of Carradine's death raised ethical questions. Graphic details of the scene were leaked to the press, and photographs from the investigation were published, leading to outrage from his family and fans. It highlighted how celebrity deaths are often treated as entertainment, with little regard for the dignity of the person or the feelings of their loved ones. For many, the coverage overshadowed Carradine's achievements and contributions to the entertainment industry. It was a painful reminder of how public figures, even in death, can lose control over their own narrative. Behind the headlines and sensationalism was a man who, like anyone else, had his complexities, struggles, and private desires. David Carradine was more than the circumstances of his death. He was an artist, a father, and a man who brought something unique to every role he played. His demise also served as an opportunity to talk about subjects often considered taboo. While the circumstances were shocking, they also brought awareness to the risks associated with practices like autoerotic asphyxiation and the importance of understanding mental health and personal struggles. The Manson Massacre Case. August 8, 1969. Sharon Tate, an up-and-coming actress and the wife of famous director Roman Polanski, was hosting a casual evening at her home in Benedict Canyon. She was 8 months pregnant and just hanging out with some friends. Jay Sebring, a big-time hairstylist, Abigail Folger, who was basically coffee royalty, and Abigail's boyfriend, Wojciech Frykowski. It was supposed to be a quiet night, but what unfolded was the stuff of nightmares. Charles Manson wasn't there himself, but he sent 4 of his followers, Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian, to carry out his gruesome orders. They broke into the house and unleashed a level of violence that even Hollywood couldn't script. By the time it was over, all 4 of Sharon's guests were dead, and Sharon herself had been stabbed multiple times. It was so brutal that the killers used her blood to write the word pig on the front door. As if one night of horror wasn't enough, Manson sent his followers out again the very next evening. This time, they targeted Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, a wealthy couple in Los Feliz. Just like the night before, the murders were absolutely savage. The killers left bizarre messages written in blood like "Rise" and "Death to Pigs" to make sure everyone knew this was no ordinary crime spree. At first, the murders seemed random, like some terrifying home invasions with no rhyme or reason. But when the police started piecing things together, a horrifying picture began to emerge. The mastermind behind it all was Charles Manson, a failed musician and cult leader with a serious God complex. He had this wild idea he called Helter Skelter, which he took from a Beatles song. In Manson's twisted mind, he believed these murders would spark a race war, and once the dust settled, his little cult would rule the world. Totally delusional, right? Even creepier, the house where Sharon Tate and her friends were killed wasn't picked by chance. Manson had a grudge against Terry Melcher, a music producer who used to live there and had turned Manson down for a record deal. Manson didn't seem to care that Melcher had moved out. Sharon Tate and her guests were in the wrong place at the wrong time. At first, the police were stumped. The Tate and LaBianca murders didn't seem connected, and the randomness of the violence made it hard to pin down a motive. But then, they caught a break. Actually, it was more like a confession. One of Manson's followers, Susan Atkins, couldn't keep her mouth shut while she was in jail on a separate charge. She bragged to her cellmate about the murders, spilling all the gruesome details and even admitting to writing in blood on the walls. When the cops heard about Atkins's confession, they started digging into Manson and his family. That's when they realized they were dealing with a full-blown cult. Manson's followers were so brainwashed that they'd do anything he said, no questions asked. It was like something out of a horror movie.